All right, everybody. It's 4 sharp, so I'm going to keep going. I've got to cover some of the housekeeping rules anyway, so folks won't be missing too much if they dial in a little bit later. A very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Karina Kwok. I'm the Head of Professional Practices and Community at IHRP. Welcome to our very first IHRP hosted webinar for 2021. I hope all of you had a very restful December break and have already hit a steady stride for 2021. Today, we're very pleased to partner with Sriram Iyer and his team from HR Tech SG to host David Guazzarotto from LeapGem to discuss a very hot topic on employee experience design. Now, some of you may actually remember that we hosted a session with David and Jason Everbrook back in November 2020, entitled Reimagining HR for Business. And during that webinar, some of you in the audience actually indicated that you would like us to cover a session on the topic of personas and design thinking. So here we are. Before I pass the time to David to share on LeapGem's approach to employee experience design, let me first very quickly go through some of the housekeeping rules. Next slide, please. Now, we'll definitely be recording this webinar, and it will be available about 1 week post this session. If you have Q&A, please use the Q&A functionality at the bottom here. That's where we'll be looking for all the questions. And if you have specific questions for panelists, please indicate the name of the panelist and then type your questions. And in order to minimize disruptions, we've actually muted all the videos and microphones. We may not be able to address all questions, but rest assured, we will be collating FAQs and we'll sending out together with our follow-up email. Now, as you can see, some of you are already saying, bidding everyone good afternoon and so on, the chat function, so you know where that is. Do feel free to use that, but if you do have a question, please use the Q&A function. Please refrain from taking pictures of the presentation materials. We will be sending the presentation slides out. And we will need you to, if you want to share this beyond the attendee list, please write in to us at community@IHRP.SG and we'll get permission from each of the various speakers here for use of their slides. Now, without further ado, let me quickly do a quick shout out introduction to David. So David is the APAC MD for LeapGem and one of Asia-Pac's leading authorities of human resource and talent and technology. He has deep expertise in Australia and global HR technology space and is highly sought after for advice and coaching by enterprise solution providers. So without further ado, let me just pass it over to you, David.
Thank you, Karina, and what a great introduction. I guess my mum must have written that for you, did she? Well, welcome everyone, and look, it's great to be here. And look, as Karina said, great to be here again with certainly some of you who, may have seen Jason and I present back in November. So this is a great opportunity for us to reconnect, and I'm so excited to be able to bring together with these great supporters today in IHRP themselves, and thanks Karina and the team there, and to Sriram, the HRTech.SG team, and of course the HR and finance community, Singapore Polytech and Asia HRM. So thanks folks very much. So today, if we can go to the next slide. The connection we're making here, of course, is with that presentation back in November, but I appreciate too that there's a lot of folks on this. We've had such great interest and a tremendous level of registration for this event. So I'm not going to presume that all of you were on the session back in November, but for those that were, who were looking for a deeper dive and a focus on the experience design piece, that's what we're going to be doing today, along with also taking a bit of a broader look at the topic of employee experience, and that's where I'll introduce our panelists shortly. They're going to help me to really make stronger connections from some very great perspectives. So it's a great opportunity. I'm delighted to be able to work with this amazing bunch of folks. So today we'll take, and if you actually, so it's probably worth mentioning the study that's on that slide. So IHRP and MOM have commissioned a study, and what came back was really interesting around jobs being impacted by technology. And I guess, this was happening before the pandemic. It's just been supercharged, turbocharged, and pushed along at a greater rate, given the disruption and the acceleration of digitisation. And we'll be sharing a few thoughts on that as we go through as well. But a couple of things also came out of this study is HR jobs being impacted by technology, 90% of them. So 9 out of 10 HR jobs are going to be different from where they are today or where they were probably in 2019. And key themes that came out of that around, all of these are quite relevant to our discussion today, but looking at building consumer grade experiences and digitising HR, those in 2019 were already big ticket items, and they've just simply been doubled down with what's impacted us 2020. So moving on into just to sort of cover off what we're looking at today. We're calling this designing for the empty chair. It's a term that you would have heard Jason use when we presented back in November. It's not a leap gen. We don't own the rights to that. The term empty chair is used in a lot of context, and really what it is designed to do is to focus our attention on being empathetic to someone else. So we use the empty chair as an analogy or as a symbol of thinking from someone else's perspective. So that's the essence of designing for the empty chair. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of broad scene setting first, and then I'm going to show you how we at LeapGen work with some of our clients to help them design for the empty chair. And then I'll get some help from some friends, an amazing panel that we brought together, share some insights. But first, let me ask you a question, and you'll see a poll has come up already, and I can see some engagement in there already. We're asking the question, does your organisation have a digital HR vision to fuel your workforce experience design? Pretty straightforward question, and we can already see, interestingly, a lot of no's, a lot of working on it's coming through, and it's no surprise that we haven't been able to pay the attention that we might have to this. A lot of organisations are playing catch up, and a lot of organisations are working on it. It's great to see the level of you out there, and it's 387 attendees on this, so it's a great sample that we can use to see that we're working on it. So we'll give it a couple of minutes, and we've closed the poll. Is that right? Yeah, so we're seeing the results there, and it's by a whisker we've got working on it. So that's great, because you know what that means if we're working on it. Some of the tools that I'm going to introduce to you shortly are the sorts of things you're probably thinking about needing to use or wanting some help with. So that's a pretty good place for you to be if you've got some activity going on at the moment. For those who are in the know, then hopefully this will catalyse you as well. Very good. So keep the comments coming. Now, I will say something in the chat box. You'll note if you go into the chat box, there's a little box you can select to send a chat to someone in particular. Can I suggest it? I think it's defaulting to panelists, so you're only sharing insights with those of us that are on the panel today. If you'd like to share to the whole audience, and I'd encourage you to do so, select the panelists and attendees. That'd be great. All right, so let's move on. And firstly, thanks for responding to the poll, and thanks to all of you that have turned up today. Let me quickly introduce our amazing panel today. And to start with, we have someone who I think is already known to you quite well, and our HR practitioner perspective, Daniel Chia, heads up HR for Samsung. Welcome, Daniel. Give us a bit of a wave up there. Great to have you here. Daniel's a non-conventional HR practitioner. He's someone who certainly thinks deeply about the HR function, and I would say from the interactions that we've had and what I hope, I know he's going to share today, he's going to give us some great perspective as the HR practitioner. Then we have our HR tech solution provider perspective. And we have, wait for it, Frederick. I've been practicing all week, Frederick. Scugiviero. How do I go? Welcome, Frederick. Fred, can't see you on my screen. Fred is a very vibrant presenter. He's someone who is passionate about people and processes and spends a lot of his time thinking about how people experience can be enhanced through the connections that he makes in solution consulting at Unit 4. So looking forward to Fred's participation on the panel. We also have Jay Narayanan, and welcome, Jay. Jay's our academic perspective, but Jay doesn't present like an academic. So I'm really looking forward to your session shortly, Jay, as well. So welcome to the panel, Jay. You've heard from Karina already. So Karina Kwok, we're asking you to come back in and help us and really share your deep insights from a policy influencer perspective, and got your eyes and ears out there and see and hear a lot from certainly both the industry perspective, but also what's happening in government and policy areas too. And lastly, and certainly not least, we've got a perspective from our investor and VC community. I'm pleased to have Dan Callaghan with us, who's amongst other things, the managing partner at Workplace Accelerator. And Dan's out there at the pointy end and looking at where innovation's taking us and the trends. And so that's the perspective that we're looking from Daniel today. So to get us warmed up, I'm just going to spend the next little piece taking you through some context setting. I'll share as I said, some of the LeapGen IP and coach you through some of that as well. And then we'll work through. We're going to give the panelists an opportunity just to share their perspectives for a few minutes with some of them, with some slides, and just to give you their angle. And then I'm going to wrangle all of them. I'm going to encourage all of you out there attending to hit them up with questions, and I'll do my best to moderate a discussion off the back to encompass your Q&A and your questions and make it very engaging for you. So when we talk about the subject of experience, and I'll get you to move on to the next slide now, and we think about designing for the empty chair, that is, a focus that getting the different perspectives is going to help us to think about putting someone in that empty chair and thinking about the empathy. But it's about creating experience, and it's about the subject of employee experience today. I won't tell you any more about LeapGen. You can read that slide when they're through, and go to our LinkedIn pages as well. But the focus on employee experience, as I alluded to at the start, it's fast become the most important focus for HR, but it's not new. We have been increasingly having to think about the focus on experience. The rise of the digital age has driven this, but technology itself does not determine the experience. It is, however, an increasing factor in it. And as we see more and more digital natives, like Fred, coming into the workforce and being informed by digital and wanting technology to be consumer style and to be supporting them in the workplace in the same ways as it does in their consumer lives. All of those have been factors that have been driving a focus on employee experience. But next slide, we've grappled to drive that transformation, but suddenly in a matter of weeks, everything changed radically and forever. Work has changed. Where people work, how they work, when they work, all of that's been thrown up in the air in 2020. Workers themselves have changed. Next slide, thanks. What matters to them has changed. The focus, we've got people living their whole lives at work and at home all at the same time, so we've changed that focus for them. Businesses have changed also, and businesses have been disrupted, business models have been affected, the economy has played a part in that as well. So all of that has driven a renewed and an important focus on employee experience. And I'm sure some of our panelists will go deeper in some of those and share the perspectives on what that means in the context that they're in. But why now? That's the question, I guess. And there's a few things that are quite obvious, but we'll state them clearly as to why now we're elevating this focus on employee experience. Because everything we need to drive transformation, is now here for us. COVID-19, the pandemic, was the digital accelerant of the decade. We have seen, we've basically been driven from thinking about the future of work to suddenly being in the now of work. So this whole notion of future of work and navigating towards it suddenly was thrust out of our control. And we've all had to deal with it, whether we were prepared or not. So that's, a big catalyst. And that data on that slide there, 97% of enterprise decision makers have responded to this survey saying the pandemic sped up their company's digital transformation. That is, it may as well be 100%. It basically is saying everyone's digital transformation agenda was accelerated as a result of COVID-19. Now, if we move to the next slide, the previous inhibitors, so a lot of the reasons why we weren't moving at a fast pace were because of things like business cases, needing to be conservative and very committee driven around decisions. We were a bit risk averse perhaps to change the ways that we were working and wanting to do that at the pace we thought change could be handled in our organisations. All of these disappeared as we reacted to disruption. So I guess my call out to you is, number one, it's time to get back in control and it's time to get proactive again. So now we will not be going back to the old normal. That's clear. We're not going to have to react to we don't want to react to a new normal. What we want to do is to navigate to a better normal. And it's this notion of, next slide, humanity being more important than ever. The pandemic drove that. It exposed a lot of things that, it didn't discriminate. It was a public health crisis first. But what it's done is make HR the most important function in organisations today. As of January 2021, and let's hope it remains so for some time yet, but right now you are still the most important function. There is no other role in the C-suite that is more important to organisations than the CHRO. So it's time, whether you like that or not, to make sure you take the initiative, and let's be more proactive around that. Next slide. Really, it's about the now of work. But what then getting to the now of work requires us to do is to really dig deep and understand people, to know our people better, who they connect with, how they're feeling, and what they're thinking about. This is a shift for a lot of HR organisations and from the way we've operated and the way we might still be operating. We've traditionally been the protectors of the organisation from its people. And that's, we've had a lot of process and a lot of things that we've put in place to stop the 1% of people who are naughty or who do the wrong thing. We have to change that. We have to shift that mindset, and we have to be thinking human-centred first. And that's where we get to with designing for the empty chair. And if we go to the next slide, I'm now going to rush us through how we go about thinking about designing for the empty chair and using experience design as the framework. At LeapGen, we pride ourselves on, being quite bespoke, and we come to our clients and we work in their worlds. To do so and to bring tools like design thinking, we have to think about that from both a mindset perspective, but also having the tools and the methods to be able to really inform the design and to take us through that whole process effectively. So if we think about how and why, the how and the why. So the why is the mindset, and how is the method. This is what is fundamental to design thinking, and that's not a LeapGen proprietary thing. That is, from when management consultants like IDEO back in the early 2000s, brought the design thinking model into play. This method was there, and the focus that we need to do is really driven out of empathy. So this connection to the empty chair is about empathy, and it's about stepping into the shoes of the other person or the person that we're designing for and thinking through from their perspective. So traditionally, we may have thought about a policy or a procedure or a process or some sort of transaction that we required support from technology or from process, and we would design that around the outcome for the business largely, and then we would configure, build, deploy the technology, and then we would train our people how to use it. This method is about flipping that around and putting the human at the center. So if we have the experience design methodology from LeapGen, it starts from putting the human in the center, right? And the methodology we use is broken down into 3 key phases that you see there. So at the top, you see learn, innovate, and deliver. So typically they're sequential. So we like to go around the circle from that learn spot in defining and round, but there is iteration in an agile mode, and we do always look for opportunities to inform by going between the phases in different ways as well. So with learn, and we're going to focus today primarily on that define area. So I'm just going to take you through some tools that we use, and starting with persona. So we had a lot of great questions in the session we ran before Christmas around persona development and how we go about doing that. I probably don't need to highlight the benefits of a persona, but suffice to say, what we're trying to do is to really strip away any preconceptions that we have and look at grouping a bunch of like people and creating a persona to represent them. So that's what we're doing there. And why we do that, it helps us to get a company-wide understanding of the workforce. It focuses on empathy. We can chunk the workforce down into digestible workforce segments. And the interesting thing there is, rather than focusing on a group based on an organizational construct, we can look at it. It could be demographic. It could be based on styles of working. It could be based on their sentiment, that we would group personas. So it doesn't necessarily need to be like for like with a bunch of roles in an organization. Allows us then to use that framework to go around that circle, and do ideation, create ideas, prototype them, and then test them out with that audience. And really with that test piece, what is really important is that we use real humans that are affected by this to test this out on as well. So having the persona helps to inform that design. Getting to that is a process of going out and asking great questions. We do that through surveys, and we've got a number of instruments that we can share with you to help you do that. Where we land is this sort of a representation, okay, where we have a name attributed, so we're personifying this. Nia represents an upward and outward employee, so we're using a sort of a type or a disposition of some degree. So we're putting some demographic information in there about that role. We like to put insights too. So what from the surveys can we take out that give us insights into that group and that help us to inform. Then getting into some of the sentiments. So if we look at what's frustrating them, so what comes out of that research that we do that we can articulate as frustrations that we can look to address through better design. What are some of their needs as well? And then barriers out on the right-hand side, there is also a way in which we're able to provide, these come out very readily when we go into workshops particularly. We ask the question, what's stopping you from achieving what you want to, or what's getting in the way of you being the best you can. You're achieving your potential. Lack of time, reorganisation. And then we want to centre that around, well, what are they hoping to achieve and how are they going to get there? Going to push through. As I said at the outset, we could probably spend hours dissecting these, and I'm very happy and glad to do that at any point in time with you after this. So please make contact with us to do that. When we've got a persona, the other angle which is important to do is to look at the intersection of that persona or that group of people with others. So in this example here, we're looking at additional needs that play out, and where we've got people who come in whose persona are showing difference, but where the needs intersect, and having an appreciation for where they do intersect from individual needs at the persona level down to the shared needs, might be group level or might be team level, and then possibly even at the organizational level. So that helps us to understand the magnitude of perhaps of difference that might exist, but also how critical some aspects of or some of the ways in which we can improve the experience, and where we can scale that across different personas to achieve the outcome. So moving on to the next slide, we're getting to the end of what I've got. The other really great output from the define piece in our methodology is a journey map, and you've probably all heard the term journey map before. Journey maps get confused with process diagrams a lot, I think, and so really what I'd ask you to do is, again, using the empty chair model to step into the shoes of the person, of that persona, look at what a scenario might look like that you want to tackle, and then take a walk in their shoes through that and look at the intersection of all of the things that might happen. This one is an onboarding one. We do a lot of work around onboarding. We've done a lot of work around onboarding in 2020 because of the shift. There are a lot of employees that have never met their managers face-to-face, and so they've been onboarded digitally, and so that's been an important part of it. A couple of things to highlight here. Being able to look at the flow of the activity and where that intersects with things like technology, also the personal interactions. But we've got a sentiment tag there, so you can see there's a green dot and it's a bit higher. Then that's something that's coming back as people are happy with that. They're getting a good experience. Where it's red, it's highlighting places that we really do want to devote some energy as well. Lots and lots to cover off on that, and in the interests of pushing forward to the panelists, we're going to stop there with my piece. I'm going to leave this with you to say we have a wonderful bunch of materials that we're going to package up, and I think you will receive that as this is part of the pack afterwards. But please, if you want to contact us directly, I'm going to put my LinkedIn profile here in the chat box below, so you can link in with me and message me and ask me for specific things as by way of follow-ups. But this pack will come, and it's got a few little gems in there for you to look at to remind you of some of the stuff that I've gone through today. Whew. Right, let's take a deep breath. Thanks for indulging me, and I hope I've gone some of the way at least to frame up I guess the backdrop of where we're at and why we're seeing employee experience as a really important frame, why HR should take leadership with that and dive into some tools to help you to do that. Right, let's move on now and get another voice to the conversation. So I'm going to introduce now Daniel Chia, who is our practitioner perspective. And Daniel, I'm so pleased to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to you sharing some of your insights. So take it away, and we'll sit back and listen.
Thank you, David. All right, so David, really thanks a lot for setting the stage. In fact, a lot of your sharing actually echo my views, my personal views in terms of what is employee experience in a way. So to me, I don't have many slides. In fact, with the next 2 slides itself, I just want to share with all participants in terms of some of my personal views in terms of how do you go about, designing an employee experience kind of journey, kind of design. So if I may have the next slide. So to me, very simple is when you want to design an employee experience journey, in fact, you should start with this term called hire to retire. So why do I term it that way is, in fact, the employer experience actually started even when the candidate, went to your organization for the interview process. And right now, due to the COVID-19 situation, we are doing a lot of interview virtually, via Zoom, via other virtual platform. In fact, the setup, the treatment, when the candidate attend an interview session, to me, that is equally important. Whether the hiring manager come on time, whether even the candidate, when they arrive, do you actually serve them a simple drink because they make all the way down to your office to attend an interview? Even the accuracy of the address itself. To me, I think those are very important. So ultimately, when the staff join the organization, and I think David mentioned about the onboarding process, that I totally agree. How they experience through the onboarding process, subsequently with their L&D development, career progression, and one day, all of us will retire, or in a way, if we found another opportunity, we will exit the organization. So even the exit clearance process itself is also an employee experience, in my opinion. So I think with my few years experience, working in various MNC, so to me, some of my proud moment will be, in terms of this particular L&D journey, whereby how we actually redesign the whole L&D journey, that we make it more employee focused. I mean, we actually do hear from the employee, from the line manager, and it's not just a one solution fit all kind of L&D solution whereby we apply to everyone. So by listening what really matters to the staff, to the line manager, we are able to design an L&D kind of proposal and solution. And in fact, we see a drastic improvement from a previous year of learning hours to last year of learning hours. We actually see a good 60% improvement in terms of learning hours, and people are more engaged in terms of taking their personal development into their own hands, and they actually spend time to go through learning. Yeah, so that's, to me, I thought it was also some success story, whereby if you really focus putting the people, the employee in the center of your design, you can actually see the positive improvement. So next, I want to share was also an employee engagement survey. In fact, it was a pulse survey that we had done 2 years ago, before the whole COVID situation. And I think the survey was, unlike the typical yearly or bi-yearly formal employee engagement survey. So this informal survey, actually, we wanted to hear from the staff what really concerned them, what really impact them. And interesting enough, this particular point about laptop efficiency actually came about. So quite a number of staff actually feedback to us that, maybe it's time for them to change their laptop because it's of an older model, it's not so productive. So I think with the management, we put in the investment, the budget to really get all the laptops we check, and whichever the faulty laptop, we get it replaced in a way. So in fact, that really helped to motivate the staff quite a fair bit. And we didn't do that due to the COVID. In fact, we didn't know COVID was coming. And when during the circuit breaker, the lockdown in Singapore, I'm very glad that I think most of the staff actually has a up-to-date or a good working laptop, and they can basically choose to work from home due to the circuit breaker implementation. So I think that is something I thought it was also meaningful and useful, especially when we come to design and employee experience journey. So my next point itself is very simple. Sorry, I think the previous slide. When we talk about HR, I think in one of my interview, I say HR doesn't stand for headcount reduction. In the contrary, we really want to focus in terms of the human, in a term of human resource. And I think when it comes to designing, be it whatever implementation, whatever guideline or policy, I personally always like to keep it simple. Don't complicate things, and that's where the user will have that kind of positive experience. And whatever the intention, the content, the implementation, my view is always keep it, real and be authentic about it. And lastly, it's always good to hear the VOC. So what does the VOC stand for? It's really the voices of the customer. And in this case, the customer is actually the employee of the organization. So do hear them out. So my last point is now in the next slide, is really with the new normal, how will we go about designing an employee experience journey? I think it's very tough, and in fact, we are given no choice. We have to, design something. And in my view, you have to design a winning business that is actually people approach. And when you take care of the employee overall well-being, it's not just about physical, but do take note about financial and mental. And next, about navigating through restriction and limitation, like especially now we still have this 50% work from office, work from home kind of guideline. I think as an employer, as a HR, we need to actually find ways to navigate through it. And lastly, totally again echo what David has shared. I think beside empathy, I think the word trust to me is very important, because due to this hybrid workforce, a lot of trust need to be given. And empathy is, putting yourself in the shoe of the employee. But I think ultimately altruism, compassion, those are also essential competency that we need to develop and show, especially during the new normal. All right, so back to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. That's so insightful. I really appreciate that. Very practical examples of how putting your employees at the centre has really helped you to drive those outcomes. Whilst you were presenting, we had a couple of great questions coming in. I'm going to very quickly just ask, because they related to the back end of my personas and journey maps. We had one, I guess they're related. One was asking about the research phase and what we should be doing, and also around the process of the extent of the works. So Nora Slinder, thank you. She says, I would like to know the extent of works that were done to achieve the personas and journey maps, and how does your team get the insights? So look, the two are quite related, and really it's about gathering information, but doing it with the actual people participating. So a lot of what we tend to get caught up in is thinking we know how people are responding or what they need, and the old-fashioned style of requirements definition and process mapping and even using lean. I'm not against lean methodologies and the like, but my encouragement to you is to really use a highly engaging method to find out what's going on in people's worlds. Now, you can do that in a very light and quick way, either by leveraging things you already know and by being able to get the voice of the customer. And Daniel's just shown us how they have used voice of the customer. That's a really important tool, and it's one that we use in our consulting around this. That can be done in workshops and focus groups. That can be done through surveys as well. But then the other side of it is making sure that we understand the impacts and the intersections, and I guess the journey mapping piece comes from that, right? And again, it's really important that we do the journey mapping by taking a walk in the shoes and actually experientially mapping what happens at every point. So those are a couple of pointers to it. I don't have the time to go deeper than I hope it answers the question. Keep the questions coming through. Thank you very much. And we've got, sorry, there was another quick question there related developing personas. Do we fall back on prior knowledge of profiles and segments of the workforce? Absolutely. I think it's a great starting point, and it's helpful to be able to make those connections with existing views of the workforce and the profiles around that. Keep the questions coming, and we'll get to those. But now I'm going to switch our focus across to our academic perspective, and we're going to introduce Professor Jay Narayanan. Thanks, Jay, and we'll let you take the reins from here.
Thanks, David. And I'm going to connect back to your personas, and it's an interesting idea which I was not aware of before you spoke about it, but I'm going to try and link to that. Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to think I'm not an ivory tower academic. I put my ears on the ground and I want to hear what's going on. So thank you so much, Leap Jen, and all of you for inviting me. Next slide, please. So if you want to kind of go up and look at like things from 35,000 feet above, what really is going on in an employer-employee relationship, right? So if you want to put a theoretical lens on this, what really is going on is there is a psychological contract between the employer and the employee. And what is a psychological contract? It's implicit often, that's the problem, but we'll try and see whether we can make it explicit. And it is subjective beliefs that both parties hold regarding obligations that you both have towards each other. So there is an obligation that the employer has towards the employee. There is an obligation the employee has towards the employer. And if everything is going hunky-dory, if the contract is fulfilled, if both parties have similar perspectives and beliefs, these relationships tend to go fine. But when it is breached, often, and as often it does, then fit hits the shan, for being polite. So essentially what you're trying to avoid in these situations is really to see what is the implicit contract here between the employer and the employee. Next slide, please. So if you look at lots of studies have been done on what is the content of these obligations that employees hold about what employers should do for them. And this is, by no means an exhaustive list, but if you kind of cull the literature, you look at different pieces to the puzzle, these are some pretty obvious ones that come out. They are not rocket science. These are pretty straightforward. You provide proper onboarding, proper training, you make sure that people are equipped to do what they do. You ensure fairness. This is a very important idea. We need to ensure that there is fairness in terms of both outcomes as well as fairness in terms of procedures. And there is a whole bunch of literature on how employees value procedures as much as they value outcomes. So, for example, they will take a bad outcome if you actually provide them with solid rationale for why you arrived at that outcome. And this personal needs, allow time to meet personal needs. That's become very important, very critical, especially in times now. Like I have a 7-year-old daughter running behind me and making noise. So if you make that a taboo on your Zoom calls, then you're going to not really take the perspective of the employee. But you normalize that. You say the work is coming to the living room. Let's kind of normalize that. Let's make that a part of work now. That then is a very different story. You consult employees on matters that affect them. You provide sufficient autonomy. We know the literature from people have basic needs, autonomy being one of them. And not all people will require autonomy to the same degree. There are some jobs that will require greater autonomy. Others will require less autonomy. Treat employees humanely. This should seem obvious, but it's not always the case. When we do know, and David kept mentioning the idea of empathy, perspective taking. It turns out that human beings are remarkably good at not being able to take perspective when you can socially distance people, not in the COVID sense, but in the sense when you're sitting in the headquarters, when you're looking at numbers of what to do in a factory in a remote part of Vietnam. I'm just taking that as an example. You don't think of the humanity there, you think of the statistics and the numbers. So the greater the distance, the lesser is the humanity. So we need to kind of remember to take that perspective, have that empathy. And we know this from the literature on empathy and perspective taking. For example, in the charity literature, you show the picture of a person suffering, people will give to charity. But if you just show people, hey, lots of people are dying of malaria in Africa, people don't care. But you show the picture of a family suffering because of malaria, people will actually give money to charity. So we have this what's called the empathy gap. So you need to find ways to bridge the empathy gap as human beings, and you need to do that as an HR community. Recognize and reward contributions, and that's a whole big topic, and pay equitably. So these are kind of broad organizational obligations, and I can talk about each one of these for a long period of time. But given the limited amount of time, I would rather we have a conversation around some of these topics than for me to go into this. So, but I just want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into one area in which I and some of my colleagues and students have put our heads into, which is the idea of fairness in selection and recruiting. So next slide, please. So let's go into this example, right? Like, so there is an idea that technology could be like a solution to a number of issues we face in fairness in selection. And I'm not against technology. I'm an engineer who turned into an HR person who's now turned into an academic. So I'm all for technology, but I do worry about what I call D-fetish, which is digital fetish, where you think that technology can answer all problems. There are things technology can do, there are things technology can't do. And it's a very complicated answer. I'm saying I'm all for technology. I'm actually building a master's program, which will be all about bringing technology into HR. But here, I want to take this example of fairness, right? So we did a study to look at whether technology can solve the problem of fairness in selection, right? So we actually asked people whether they would find it okay when they got positive or negative outcomes when an algorithm is actually making decisions on whether they are a suitable candidate for a job, right? So we gave people hypothetical scenarios. It turns out that exactly what David was talking about earlier on, it's the personas that matter. So it seems that people will accept a poor outcome in a selection process when an algorithm is making that decision, because they actually think that an algorithm is incapable of understanding their persona. Everyone thinks we are unique, right? Like every one of you here thinks you're unique, and you think an algorithm cannot capture that uniqueness. So if people feel that the algorithm is actually not paying attention to their uniqueness, then you may have the fairest algorithm, but people will not accept that to be a fair process. So and then they will throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I want to leave you with that thought. And David's on my screen, reminding me in my subjective experience that my time is up. Thank you, David. Over to you.
Jay, awesome. And what a great place to land. I got so much out of that short burst from you. I want more. I'm sure the audience does too. But it's a great segue actually to our solution provider perspective, because landing on the algorithms and them taking the place of where humans have been and that impact on experience, there's probably no one better to help us to explore that and many other things from a provider perspective than Frederick. So over to you, Frederick.
Thank you, and thank you, Jay, and thank you, Daniel, for your insights. Really exciting topic, and sort of as a cliffhanger on sort of your end of your talk, Jay. Sort of, I totally agree with you that technology cannot replace all processes or decision making, but technology should never be in the way of doing it, and that's sort of a different approach that we work a lot with. So, next slide, please. When you hear the name Unit 4, some of you guys might be Unit Who, but we have actually been around for 40 years providing solutions for the services industry in people-centric areas. So we focus on professional services, not-for-profit, higher education, and public services. And these are very heavy people-centric organizations where people are the ones providing all the goods you're selling. And this year we turned 40. Normally, normally when you turn 40, it's time to sort of reflect a little bit upon your life. And we chose to release an entirely new cloud-based platform, ready to create an even more extraordinary people experience. And we have done something a little bit different than most tech providers. Normally, tech providers, they add more functionality, more modules, more information. We have actually started to cut off fat, and we want to do fewer things well. What we then want to do is to enable our organizations to be flexible. Look at the time we're in now. How many have been forced to change their processes, change the way we work, change where we work. So we have chosen to invest in this because we believe in the services economy. We have seen good growth in the services economy in mature markets over the last 5 years. We have seen 30% growth. So what the leaders in the services industry need is a solution that is able to scale with them. So that's both for HR, that's also for finance and for planning and analytics and project management and so on. Next slide, please. One thing we also see in the services industry is that there's a huge competition for talent. People are your greatest assets. That's what you sell services. So you need talent. That sort of talent hunt is intensifying, and that's also, so for that you need to be able to attract and retain the best talent. Next slide, please. Another thing we see again and again in the services industry is disruption. Disruption is a little bit of an old term these days. We don't talk about it that much. But disruption in the services industry both come internally in the company and also externally in the company. Externally could be the pandemic happens. How do we provide our service when everything is shifted around? It could be internally. We need to implement new business models. We have a new management team coming on that wants to restructure to provide efficiency. We need to release a new service, so we need to reorganize all our reporting workflows, reporting lines, manager relations, so on and so forth. How do we work with this in a quick and way where we have no downtime? That's also something we focus on a lot. Next slide. And then we see, hence why we're also here, that there is an increased focus on people experience. Today's employees, especially sort of the younger generation, they don't bite on sort of the old-fashioned transactional systems, the old-fashioned transactional ways of working. They want to use solutions that are as good as the ones that they're using in their free time. We want to make sure that we don't talk so much about employee satisfaction anymore. We talk more about engagement, because it's actually very difficult sort of comparing these two. We went from a time where we did employee satisfaction surveys once a year or once every second year. Today, what we provide is pulses. I take this as a hint that I need to move on. So Unit 4 provide the most modern platform in the industry with fully integrated ERP, HCM, and financial planning analytics with smart automated services, extension kits. We can build low-code, no-code integrations, which means that we can actually extend our system to any other system or any other work area. We don't talk about user interface anymore. We talk about user experience. And I can see David is cheering on me finishing. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to see some questions. And David, over to you.
There will be. Yeah. So thanks, Fred. No, that's great. Look, it's great to see. One of the things I think is important is particularly solution providers that have been around for 40 years. Like, it's so easy just to keep doing what you do, and it's very often quite hard to start to innovate. And obviously, when we get a chance to get Dan Callaghan's perspective shortly, you're looking at new players, new entrants, always chipping away and taking some of that space. So to actually have to keep reinventing and rethinking the platforms is an important thing. And we need our vendors to be thinking like that. So thanks for sharing the Unit 4 perspective on that and your personal perspective, Fred. We're going to put a little poll. We were going to put a poll up. We are. We've got a poll coming up now. Right. Wake up, everyone. Answer this question. Have you changed your HR operating model? So we're thinking about the operating model to enable to be able to drive digital experiences in the new digital workplace. Lots of answers coming through. While those answers are coming through, Jay, there was a very quick question in there, and I'm going to ask it and give you 20 seconds to jump in on it. Can you share any theories for validating the fairness in selection that you mentioned? So I think you talked a bit about bias and unconscious bias. Are there any?
Yeah. So I posted a link. I posted a link on the chat, awesome, which links to the paper. But essentially, people have what's called algorithm aversion. We don't like algorithms to make decisions on our behalf. But essentially, you can work around that. There are ways to overcome the ecological aversion people have towards algorithms. I'll leave it at that. That's 20 seconds.
Awesome. No, that's a great little gem in that. I agree with you. I put a comment too around, some of the problem with the algorithms can be who's actually programming them. So it still comes back to human factors, and some biases can get into the algorithms by virtue of, the people that are actually writing them. So I'm sure, Karina, we might actually be uncovering more and more topics here for us to explore as the year goes on, which is always great. So look, thanks for sharing your insights on the poll. Again, we have a fair proportion here who are working on it, which is great, because we can't just put our head in the sand and think that our old operating models are going to thrive in the new world, the digital age. And so it's encouraging to me, and I'm sure it is to the rest of the panel here, that you're really giving it some thought. And to the 22% of you that haven't got there yet, take the reins and reach out to any of us if you want to break the ice on some ways in which you can get cracking on it as well. So thanks very much for sharing your insights. I'm going to turn the microphone back to Karina Kwok. And Karina, going to get you to share a short burst of perspective from the policy influencer standpoint.
Sure, thanks. If we could move on to the next slide. So as David shared, 2020 had been really busy for my team and I because we had two kind of major projects that we're working on. The first one was the research study on the impact of technology on HR jobs and skills. And the second one was to refresh our body of competencies, which was actually established back in 2016. So about a 4-year refresh cycle. And a very key activity in both of these projects were that we had engaged our consulting partners, Willis Towers Watson and Mercer, to do a trend scan for us. And that's not just a desktop study. They talked to a lot of their subject matter experts, as well as we also went out there and validated some of these thoughts and ideas, point of views with our community. So our MPs, our SPCPs, and also the HR committee at large. And one major theme that came up for us is this topic on employee experience. So, I can't do justice to all the trends that were uncovered, but very quickly, the 3 key ones that you see at the top of the page is what I thought, was more resonant to the theme at hand. What we see as influencing the focus, this big focus on employee experience design. So the first one is we are all consumers out there, and we all know how easy it is to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. So there's lots of user-friendly applications out there, and yet sometimes I've heard certain, business leaders and senior HR leaders say that when they go to the office, it's almost like they've gone back in time and have turned back the technology clock by about at least 5 to 10 years. So consumers want us as HR to look at more user-friendly ways to engage them. Now, the second trend, I think, is very prevalent, especially coming off 2020. We're still feeling it now. In fact, I would dare say the majority of you on this call, about 500 of you, are probably dialing in from home. And so there is now actually a growing acceptance after this worldwide work from home experiment, a growing acceptance that work can be done from anywhere, and productivity does not necessarily take a hit because of it. And then the third trend I just want to quickly highlight, relevant to this area of employee experience, is that there is an increasing presumption and expectations employees have that employers should show care, especially, we're all reeling still from 2020, and then we're still kind of watching the news on vaccination news and the numbers of COVID and so on. So I think there's a lot of empathy that's expected out there. So these 3 key trends really make it important for HR to look and emphasize how can they help their organization craft a compelling employee experience. So I can't, again, interest of time, share with you everything that's coming up in our body of competencies in this area. Sorry, if you could go back, I'm just going to highlight the 3 things. So just very quickly, shape the moments that matter. You've seen the user journey map that David had shared earlier, especially with onboarding. There are a lot of you out there who were hired completely virtually, assimilating to the organization the best that you can virtually. So it's high time that HR does look at some of these key critical moments in the life cycle of an employee to make sure that they are meaningful and the employee feel engaged, and they have various forums to provide input into how they're being managed during these moments that matter. The second is, as I said, there's so much data out there with social media. How can HR take the time to harness all this data insights so that they can continuously listen, gather the data insights, and actually analyze them to better understand the motivation factors and needs of the very diverse multi-generation workforce. And lastly, now that we've got the data, how do you make it helpful by guiding the business leaders and managers to deliver a more compelling employee engagement moment with their direct reports? We can move to the next slide now. I only have 2 slides. Okay, David, I see you there. Very quickly, just want to let you know, this is what we are doing to prepare our HR community to be tech-enabled and future-ready. As I mentioned, our body of competency has been refreshed. All the content's ready. We're just getting it all tied up with a pretty bow on our portal. So that will be launched coming soon. And we've got an exciting campaign, which we call the Bring the BOC to Life campaign, where not only do we plan to share with you what each of these, the themes are and what the competencies are, we plan to bundle and package it to where can you find more information and knowledge by working with our knowledge partners. As you can see there, we're working with SMU Academy, SHRM, as well as NUSS ISS on certain modules. We also are going to be working with our community of practices. So this is actually a program part of the HR Tech Community of Practice programming. And we will be having one focus on employee engagement and experience as well coming up. And then lastly, just to make a shout out, we do have some new products besides our certification level. We do have some new products called the skill badges. And this is actually what is in line with bite-sized pieces, where if you've done a project, let's say after this webinar, you're all stoked about it, excited about it, you talk to your manager and you undertake an employee experience project. You can then submit the, the project in for review, and you can get a people experience skill badge. And that's kind of a lifetime skill badge that you have to say that I've done a project in this, and we've got 2 proficiency levels, proficient and advanced. So if it's a more, technical project, maybe something Daniel can apply for in people experience, that's where you apply for the advanced skill badge. I will just leave that now back to David so that we can move on.
Thank you, Karina. And what a power-packed little short presentation. There's some real gems in there too, and I really love the focus on things like the moments that matter as being, if you think about empathy, that is a real empathetic perspective to bring, and for me, the moments that matter are really about how we create the experience to support that, which is always a combination of a transaction and an interaction. Sometimes we forget that and we want the technology just to handle a transaction. We think that's going to support people. But in those moments that matter particularly, we have to have both to create the experience to support those people when it really matters. So thanks for sharing that, Karina. Well, let us turn our attention now at the top of the hour, Dan, to our managing partner from Workplace Accelerator for our VC investor perspective. And I'm excited to introduce you, Daniel, to share with us what's happening in your world and the perspective you bring on especially the new and exciting ways technology are being used to impact positively the experience. So over to you, Dan.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the introduction. For those who aren't familiar with me or the Workplace Accelerator, we are Asia Pacific's only dedicated HR tech growth and investment platform. Ultimately, what we do, and it was born out of the radical workplace transformation that we were seeing in COVID, is help the highest potential HR tech businesses across the regions grow and scale to their full potential. The way we do that, first and foremost, is by trying to find out exactly what the HR community and the candidate population find to be their greatest pain points. So it's all done very much with that empty chair in mind. And one of the things that often keeps coming up, and I think is still very much forgotten, despite how much the importance of employer brand has really come to the surface of late, is that the employee experience actually starts well before they are employees. It is a closed-minded talent acquisition or a HR function that still thinks that it's their privilege to have the people come and work for them as opposed to the other way around. And therefore you really need to think first, and again, even more so in this virtual hiring world, where everyone has a pulpit on which to voice their opinion about your organization, that you are getting that hiring experience correct. And that means making sure that your own representation and brand and image is being portrayed quickly, and that you're getting across the real messages that make your employer value proposition resonate there in the community. And to do that, you can use fantastic platforms like Workbean, workbean.co, which will actually help to assess your own company culture, and then help you market it best based on that, which is a very exciting platform. And then actually, once again, when you're in the hiring process, again, every touch point that you have with that candidate is an experience for them, right? And you want to make that seamlessly as seamless as possible. Now, one of the areas, again, that often falls down is around actually the pre-employment verification and the background screening. And again, so what we're starting to see, what was a very manual process has now been radically improved and automated by businesses like Verimark. Verimark is a global pre-employment verification platform that not only helps you hire with confidence and simplicity, but also then actually helps you give back to the candidates through giving them a blockchain-based career passport with all their verified credentials. Once you've got them in the organization, I think it becomes quite simple that culture in this day and age, and performance can no longer be affected by the physical. And by the physical, I mean, we are going to be largely working in a remote or distributed or two-tiered fashion for a while. And so how do you start to align people around goals? How do you drive performance when it's not all about FaceTime or bums in seats? And again, a big rise for helping now HR can help bring in those is by choosing tools or getting involved in tools that can actually make a difference in aligning and measuring performance-based results. And again, a fantastic piece of HR technology or business technology that can do that is one called Fitbots, which uses the very modern project management and delivery framework of OKRs, made famous sort of by Google, super simple and spreadable by an age across the company. But it's all, you can't have all work and no fun, no play. And so you're increasingly seeing a rise of how do you build virtual cultures? I mean, how, if you can't have a ping pong or a, beers on Friday type environment on your company culture, or you can't do the physical team lunches, how do you let people blow off steam? And then you're now starting to see these social engagement platforms like Let's Dive, again, where people can, in your organization, can congregate virtually and do all kinds of things that they may have otherwise done in person, play games, communicate, host chat rooms, and so forth. But these two things about performance and culture now operating in the virtual world are, again, really important to take into consideration as you continue to try and engage your candidates and existing teams. Last slide. But also, then the sort of final components around the employee experience and where we're seeing a rise in tech and solutions are both on how do you keep them engaged, but how do you keep developing it? Right? And all the money that you're saying, companies are very appropriately reinvesting some of the savings from no longer needing to have offices and so forth into the development and engagement of their staff. And very useful ways to do that is around mobile learning, bite-sized learning, but also empowering your team to learn, to build their own career path and choose what content they want to learn as well. The platforms like MoveUp, again, which will not only give you a means to build your own micro-learning platform delivered on mobile, but will then also tie that back to performance, are great ways to do that. And then finally, just to think outside the norm when you're trying to create the benefits, right? What really does matter to people these days? So certainly wherever you can, personalize it, but also, there may be people who just don't feel comfortable getting on public transport yet. So, what we're starting to see is another wave of employee benefits come around transport. And there are businesses like Rush Hour, which will let you set up a micro transit network for your organization so that your employees can then get their own or collective group of employees, so shift A and shift B can get their own company bus into work and be picked up and then dropped off at home. So avoid them having to feel all that uncertainty around getting on public transport or buses in this age when they carry an unfortunate and inherent risk to them. So overall, technology can be a great and fantastic enabler. Certainly when looking at onboarding, see how you can remove the friction from the process with automated tools. When they're in the office, think about how you can align activities and goals through the use of digital platforms, as well as build a digital sense of community. And then thirdly, don't just stick to the norm. think about how you can continue to incentivize and engage and personalize that working experience and benefits offerings to your employees.
Brilliant. Hey, thanks, Daniel. That's awesome. A real whistle-stop tour through some pretty amazing innovation that's been, obviously a response to the way the world has changed so rapidly. And I think that's the great beauty and the value of certainly the startup community. It responds nimbly and quickly in an agile way to what's going on in the world. And I think it's really insightful for you to share, what you've seen and where it's being plugged in as well. So thanks for that. I'm going to ask you to stay with us because I've got a question that came in I'm going to pose to you first. And I'll, at the same time, ask the rest of the presenters to turn the videos back on. We've got about 10 minutes or so left, maybe less, Karina. And so we'll go around one last time and just get some insights from questions that have come in. Dan, the question that came through, and certainly it's one that interests me as well, is where do you see interest of investors, sort of trends in the HR tech space in 2021? And I think it's a great question. And certainly I always look to where the investment's going to help inform future, because the money tends to go in first to where the solutions follow and where the trends are addressed. Am I right in stating that? So get your reaction to that, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a little the inverse, right? The money usually backs where the trends have already taken it. Where it's usually where market demand is at its strongest. At the moment, and actually in HR tech, a global venture investment level, in Q4 last year, we saw the highest investment ever. We should classify that HR tech is obviously broader than just HR solutions like payroll and stuff. It touches on all areas of sort of remote or this future world of work and so forth. I think where we've seen a massive influx in is actually in the more underlying HR tech infrastructure. COVID has made everyone start to work remotely or realize the potential of remote hiring and distributed workforces, as well as significant cross-border hiring. So I mean, just in the last 2 months, you've seen hundreds of millions of dollars being put into payroll companies to help people manage payroll for a team they might have hired in Vietnam or India or London, depending on where their domestic partners. The other area that is getting the significant amount of attention is really around talent management. I think everyone knows that hiring growth may be stunted for a while. So it's how do you get the best out of your existing team, and how do you get to keep them, and again, in a remote or distributed fashion, engaged with the cause. So those are the two underlying HR infrastructures have a massive boost, and talent management, which again goes from engagement to micro learning to community building and career development.
Yeah, great insights. Thank you. And that's it's interesting. You see, it's kind of like we've exposed pretty quickly the good and the bad in where the investments are in organizations and where the needs are. So, if people off the back of 2020, are people thinking about investing in performance management tools in 2021 as much as they were in 2019? Probably not, right? So it's really about taking a step back and rethinking some of that, and take the lead from what's going on out there in terms of new solutions and how that might play for helping support, particularly.
David, can I just quickly chip in? I know I'm not a VC, but I get a lot of requests now, including from the World Economic Forum and places like that, around the topic of mental health at the workplace. So given that organizations are an important stakeholder in society, and we are seeing some of the biggest disruptors to people's lives, I think it's probably an important stakeholder in improving people's mental health is actually the workplace. So that's another area I see a lot of interest.
Yeah, and some of these things, and I would add, diversity and inclusion as well, which certainly as we've seen several pandemics affecting the world and the world of work in particular, and bringing into mainstream some of these areas that we knew we had to deal with, that we knew we should be addressing better, into the forefront, and certainly mental health and overall well-being. Talks to that point I made earlier about humanity never being more important than now, and that's a great point you make around that. So thanks for that. I've got a minute or so to go. I wouldn't mind just going around once more. And I was going to ask the panel just to give us their one hot tip for where they'd focus energy around employee experience in the year ahead. And that's actually a question pretty much that's been framed up by one of our attendees. So thank you, anonymous attendee, for that. So I'm going to go. I might just go around and start with you, Karina, because I'll land back with you at the end of this. What one focus would you put in the HR space around redesigning employee experience? You know, is it attracting future employees? Is it engagement? You know, where do you see it?
I think it's engagement. As we said, right now there's probably a bit of a hiring freeze as we wait for things to settle a little bit. And so I think it's important to focus on who you have and look at the moments that matter, as I had called out earlier, right? Especially given the digital slant on it. Yeah.
Awesome. Fred, taking a swig of water there, I'm going to ask you, where do you think you're seeing the focus in 2021 around experience?
I totally agree. Engagement is going to have the focus, and I think getting the best out of the situation with who we are and who we have is super important, and sort of normalizing having a life on the side of work now. I also think is something we need to start focusing on. We've been sort of in a temporary state for a while, but it's changed.
Yeah, and that's it's changed forever. And I talk a lot about this is not going to be a new normal. This will be the normal. And my rallying cry is, let's make it a better normal. Let's use the veil of never waste a good crisis. We hear. Let's use the veil of this crisis to shift the needle.
Some of good example. One of the engagement questions I got from our sort of global office here the other week was, is there not enough socializers in the office? And I'm a bit like, is that a relevant question to ask these days in your engagement pulses? I don't think so. So something focusing on what are the good questions to ask in these days, because not a lot of people will be socializing these days.
Yeah. Absolutely, good point. And Daniel, you deal with this. This stuff keeps you up at night. Where do you think you're going to focus most of your attention or your specific attention in 2021? Daniel, sorry.
Is it Daniel Chia or?
Yeah, sorry, Daniel Chia, as our HR practitioner, is keeping you up at night.
I thought you addressed.
Focusing your energy, and where would you, what's the overriding priority you see around employee experience in 2021?
No, to me, I think quite simply put it, is always the intention. Whenever you design an employee experience kind of event or activities, really ask yourself, what is the intention? Why are you doing this? And I think with the new normal, one of the main focus, I hope everyone don't forget it, is actually safety. So whatever you are doing, always take care of your employee. Safety always comes first. That's what I have in my mind. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And thank you. We've actually run up and over our time now. So I really do appreciate all of you that have come together on the panel. A collective virtual round of applause to you all. To Daniel Callaghan, to Karina Kwok, to Jane Ryan, Freddie Sky. I have to refer to my pronunciation. And Daniel Chia, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to bring you guys together. We've got so much more to explore, but thank you for your contributions. And to the 484 people that attended this at its height, and the 400 that are still there, well done. And I hope you got as much value out of this as I personally got from all of these perspectives. So thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Karina just to wrap us up, and thanks for your time.
Sure, I'll keep it short and sweet. I stand between you guys and the weekend. So thank you, David. You kind of did a big shout out of thanks. And I'd like to thank, Daniel Callaghan, Daniel Chia, Jay as well as Frederick. And then last but not least, our unsung heroes behind the scenes who've been making sure that we get this great attendance, making sure the Zoom is working. Sriram Iyer and Swecha Mohapatra from HR Tech SG, our partner. Thank you so much for helping IHRP out in pulling this together. Always a pleasure working with you. And for all of you attendees out there, you can just do us one last favor. If you can scan the QR code and give us some feedback. What topics would you like to hear from us? It's a long year ahead. Please share that, as you saw when you gave us the suggestion that you like some design thinking and persona. Here we are, we brought this to you. So let us hear from you, engaging you, right? All right. Without further ado, have a terrific weekend and looking forward to seeing you in our future webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. The silence is deafening as people leave the room. Thank you, everyone that's leaving. Appreciate all the messages. And to all of you watching the recording, hope you enjoyed it.
Yep, recording will be out there eventually.
Out there.
Yep.